She was nervous. Hell, I was nervous.
You know, and it
didn't
was
know how to
strange
react.
because I felt like there was
I knew he wasn't gonna be happy
Sonia
about
had
it.
feelings for Sam.
Several circumstances within the last few months.
Jennifer and I went to that cafe by my
Well, I couldn't get any information from her about that, and once I asked her, and she just said that I was crazy.
Not officially altered his
And also,
though in fact he was playing.
but I felt that there was something going on between
They wanted a doctor to look me over. He treated a cut on my head. But I checked myself out. I had no idea that Sonia would tell Fiora. And I only found out that they'd been at the hospital the next day. Apparently,
So we got there.
it's a shame things happen that way.
Considering the
I really
size,
like
It
Sonia.
actually walked out for about 15 minutes. I waited
After all, if I had been up front
the glass doors
and I was
while
looking
she
for
spoke.
someone
And they
If you're
appeared to
passionate
get along
into the
pretty
I
well.
was going to put an ad in the paper, but
I thought that was odd because, you know,
went away
the age difference.
and hanged himself.
Dmitri, a man of 28, of medium height and agreeable appearance, looked older than he was. He was muscular and strong, yet there was something not healthy about his complexion. It was shallow.
It was rather thin, his cheeks were hollow, and his complexion shallow. His large, prominent dark eyes had an expression of determination, and yet there was a vague look in them too. Even when he was excited and talking irritably, his eyes somehow did not follow his mood.
It's hard to tell what he's thinking, many said. People who saw something pensive and sullen in his eyes were startled by his sudden laugh, which revealed light-hearted thoughts while his eyes seemed so gloomy. A certain strained look in his face was easy to understand at such a moment. Everyone knew or had heard of the restlessness and dissipated life which he had been leading of late.
There were several stories in town about it. It was true that he was excitable by nature, of an unstable and unbalanced mind, as our justice of peace, Kachilnikov, described him.
Raskolnikov had been looking her intently, up and down. Kind of thin, pale little face. Very thin. Fairly irregular and kind of sharp with a small, sharp nose and chin. Not pretty.
Yet her blue eyes were so clear, and when they were animated her expression became so kind and good-hearted you could not help being attracted to her. Face and figure had one outstanding characteristic.
although she was 18, she still seemed like a little girl, much younger than her years, almost a child. This could be seen in some of her gestures, which seemed almost funny.
Porfiry Petrovich was informally dressed. He wore a very clean shirt under his dressing gown and worn-out slippers. He was a man of about 35, a little below average in height, stout, a bit paunchy even, smooth-shaven, without mustache or sideburns. The hair on his large round head closely cropped. His head had a peculiar outward bulge in the back. His puffy, round, slightly snub-nosed face was of a sickly, sallow hue. If the expression in his eyes hadn't gotten in the way, he might have even looked benevolent.
Jesus. I was just glad to be back in New York. I mean, Europe was great, but it just, just kicked my ass. It's always good to come back to the Big Apple.
My college buddy has this place in Paris, and every year he has this huge bash. It usually lasts like a week. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Well, anyway, Harry, that's his name. His name is Harry. He's seeing this German girl, Donata. Well, after Harry's party broke up, Donata invited a bunch of us to go to Berlin, just to, hang out and recuperate for a while.
We were there for a couple of weeks, and then we decided to go to Barcelona. And I'd never been to Spain, but I heard it was amazing.
The girls are beautiful.
We were there for 3 weeks. Anyway, I was exhausted, and my money had run out, so I hopped the first jet back to JFK.
Tell me about that night.
Dad was in a very good mood. He and Dmitri never got along very well, but I know that both of them regretted it. He hadn't heard from Dmitri for over a month, and Dad was getting worried about him. Not that he'd ever tell me, but I could tell that he missed him. This was the first time Dmitri would meet Jennifer.
Not that Dad was particularly concerned with his opinion of her, he just wanted everyone to get along, and I think he wanted to show off a little.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Jennifer is very beautiful, and that's important to my father. I'm sure he wanted her to approve of his son. Things were a little tense.
Well, yeah, I was just looking forward to seeing my dad and sister. Having a nice dinner, relaxing a little bit, taking it easy, but Dad invited his new girlfriend, and it made things a little bit awkward.
You see, I had some stuff I needed to talk to my dad about, and I just didn't feel comfortable bringing it up with her around.
See, I knew that Dmitri was broke, and I knew he wanted to ask Dad to borrow some money, but he was nervous about it.
He didn't think your father would give it to him?
Well, about 6 months ago, Dmitri was arrested. He was caught drunk driving. He also had some cocaine on him, but not much.
But when Dad found out about it, he went through the roof. I mean, he told Dmitri that he had to start paying his own way, that the free ride was over.
And Dad was drinking that night. He got pretty ugly.
Dad had been drinking that night, and it got pretty ugly.
So Dmitri was afraid to ask for the loan. Both he and Dad got drunk that night. See, my brother is the type of person who needs to feel that he's the center of attention. And, well, that night he wasn't.
And, well, that night he wasn't. Dad was fawning over Jennifer. She did most of the talking. He couldn't keep his hands off of her.
It was getting pretty late by that time, and I was in this position. You know, I was staying at a friend's house and was literally down to my last $100. I needed to talk to my father about it. Well, every time I got him alone, he just brushed me off. You know, he was drunk and he couldn't concentrate on anything but Jennifer.
Grushenka was 22 years old, and her face looked exactly that age. She had very white skin with a pale pink tint on her cheeks.
The modeling of her face might be said to be too broad, and the lower jaw was set a trifle forward. Her upper lip was thin, but the slightly prominent lower lip was at least twice as full and looking pouting.
But her magnificent, abundant dark brown hair, her sable-colored eyebrows, and charming gray-blue eyes, with their long lashes, would have made the most indifferent person, meeting her casually in a crowd in the street, stop at the sight of her face and remember it long after.
I have to confess that at first I really didn't like her.
She was quite a bit younger than Dad and seemed a bit shallow. I guess I was just a bit overcautious. After all, there was a substantial amount of money involved. But she turned out to be a very sweet person and very generous.
Generous in what ways?
She gave us a lot of latitude. We're not an easy family to get to know. Well, the evening came to a boil. Both of them had had too much to drink, and Dmitri was desperately trying to get Dad to listen to him, but he was too busy with Jennifer. He tried to pull Dad aside, but accidentally spilled his drink. My father swore at him and threw the glass at his head. I'm sure he didn't mean for it to hit Dmitri.
God, I regretted it the second it happened. I have a terrible temper. I got that from him. And I also had a bit to drink.
I also had a bit to drink, but, you know, I was so desperate at that moment. I couldn't believe he actually threw his glass at me. I didn't think rationally. I didn't think at all. I just reacted.
Just reacted.
I just reacted.
You reacted. How would you describe your reaction?
Justified.
I couldn't believe it. I'd heard about Dmitri, but had never actually met him before, and the first time I do, he starts a brawl.
He tries to break his father's nose. I mean, right there at dinner.
Well, he punched him in the face and ran out. Our family is...
Well, we've had scenes like this before, but nothing like this. I screamed, and my father fell over backwards, crashing into the coffee table.
Dmitri slammed the door behind him, and Sonia and I just stood there, not knowing what to do. Fyodor was on the floor, bleeding all over the carpet. Sonia finally went to get some ice and a towel.
I don't know why. Maybe it was the wine added to the shock, but I just suddenly found it all funny.
And once I started to laugh, I couldn't stop.
Tell me about your first lunch date with Jennifer.
I was a bit nervous. Jen is a little older than I am, and I didn't think we had very much in common.
I'd had lunch with her before, but my father had always been there for those.
At that point, things were getting more serious with her father, and I just wanted to try to get close to her.
She's very shy, and I just wanted to let her know that I wasn't the enemy. I wanted us to become friends. I wanted us to be more like a family. I know that it sounds terribly corny, but...
Actually, it was my dad who set it up. He asked me to do him a favor. This was a couple of weeks after the incident with Dmitri, and we hadn't heard from him. My brother is very good at holding a grudge. Anyway, my father was... Well, I could tell something was on his mind.
He was preoccupied, in a state of nervous excitement, not upset, quite the opposite. And he was on the phone to his lawyers a lot, almost every day.
Whatever it wasn't my business, but a couple of times I could tell he was on the verge of telling me something. I knew it had to be big.
I had to talk to Sonia about something else, something specific. A few days earlier, Fyodor had told me he'd received a phone call from someone claiming to be his son. Not Dmitri, someone else, but his son.
He thought it was a joke at first. Fyodor was worth a decent amount of change, and there had been some past incidents. A previous employee once tried to blackmail him. His ex-wife was always up to something. Well, Fyodor told this guy to call his lawyer. He figured this would scare him off. But in a few days, his lawyer called back and said that this kid had an incredible story.
He'd taken a blood test and everything checked out. And get this, he just wanted to meet his father he never knew.
We had arranged to meet at one of her favorite restaurants. I had never been there. I don't care for the East Side much.
Well, I was kind of nervous, and since I'd never been there, I got there early. It was very nice, very expensive. My father had given me his credit card, but tried not to use it very much.
Can you take that?
Mm-hmm. We had arranged to meet at one of her favorite restaurants.
Well, Jen showed up about 45 minutes late. The first thing she did was order us a round of Cosmopolitans. I'm not a big drinker, but I didn't want to be rude.
I think she'd already been drinking.
I got to the restaurant and I was starving. Sonia was sitting at the bar waiting. She looked so pathetic, nervously sipping her glass of soda, glancing at the door every couple of seconds. Well, we had a lot to talk about. Fyodor had wanted to tell her about the phone call, but couldn't find the right words. He was funny like that.
He had no trouble dealing with the biggest things, financial matters, but sometimes little things gave him trouble. So I told her. Somebody had to. Besides, I had to find out how much she already knew.
I couldn't believe it when she told me. There is a lot about my father that I don't know about, and frankly, a lot I rather wouldn't care to know about, but...
To find out that I had a brother, or a half-brother, or whatever.
How did she take it?
Well, Sonia was quiet for a long time. Then she very calmly asked if I knew what he wanted. I told her that he said that she just wanted to meet the family, and that was all. I didn't know at that point that she'd been in touch with Dmitri, and I never considered that she'd run right off to him and blab everything.
I had so many questions. How old was he?
Where is he from?
What did he look like?
Who was his mother?
Did he know about me and Dmitri?
She behaved very strangely. I mean, I don't know what I expected, but it was like I just told her it was raining outside or that the sky was blue.
If she did feel strongly about it, she certainly did a good job of hiding it. She hardly said anything the rest of lunch. And after she'd finished eating, she just stared into her water glass for a couple of minutes.
Then she said she had to go, but would like to meet her new brother as soon as possible.
I decided, Sonia and I decided right away that we had to meet Dad's other son. See, I love my dad very much, but my dad can be kind of...
You know, my father can be a bit manipulative sometimes, and, you know, I felt... Sonia and I felt that we needed to take control of the situation right away.
You both thought you had to take control?
Yeah, Sonia and I.
This new addition to your family, you got in touch with him?
It wasn't hard to do. I mean, at first I felt kind of weird about it, but a few days earlier I had been home, and my father was on the phone with someone, to his lawyers, I guess, and he scribbled down a name and a phone number. And this was before the meeting with Jennifer, before I knew anything about it. Then a few days later I went back, and the name was still there, scribbled on the phone pad by the phone. It said Sam,
917-646-2177. I wanted to call it right away, but I didn't have the nerve. For the next few days, it seemed like my father knew what we were up to. I mean, he couldn't possibly, but he was acting very strangely.
And I was so nervous that he'd find out. I felt a bit guilty going behind his back. I mean, if he found out that I was even speaking to Dmitri...
Well, I guess my father was still pretty angry. I hadn't seen him since that night. My sister had told me what was going on. She wasn't supposed to see me, but we'd get together once a week for coffee.
My sister is very nice. You know, sometimes she's too nice for her own good. She worries about me. So. Anyway, there's this little cafe on the same block as my father's apartment. You can actually see his apartment from the cafe. Sonia would buy me coffee and tell me about the news for that week. You know, from our table, you could look out and see my father walking around in his apartment. He never closed his blinds. He'd be pacing back and forth in his pajamas, talking on the phone, gesturing wildly. He was very demonstrative always.
I don't know why. One morning I woke up early, about 6 a.m. I hadn't been sleeping well for the past few days. I get insomnia sometimes. But I woke up early remembering a very strange dream.
I usually don't remember my dreams, only on rare occasions like this. The dream really disturbed me. In it, I was in my father's apartment building, but it was dusty and old, like no one lived there anymore. There were cobwebs everywhere. It was dusty and old, and it was freezing cold. I could see my breath. Anyway, I was there by myself, and I was walking down long halls and corridors, and I was lost, trying to find the numbers written on the doors. And they were all written in this strange language that I couldn't understand. When I heard the sound of a baby crying, I tried to find it, but the sound didn't come from any specific direction. I ran all around the place, but I couldn't find the baby and never seemed to get any nearer the sound. Suddenly, I knew where it was. Don't ask me how, but I knew it was lying in the bathtub of my father's private bathroom. And I knew that the bathwater was running. And if I didn't go help the baby, it would drown. And I heard the baby crying. And I could hear the water running, and there was nothing I could do. I ran down those dark corridors, trying to get to the sound of the baby, but the more the baby cried, the more lost I became. Until all at once the sound stopped and everything was silent and still. And I just knew that it was too late, and that the baby was dead. And I remember crying, thinking, what kind of world is this where babies can die just like that? No one comes to help a crying baby. They just let it die. It was terrible. The dream was so vivid. For a second, I wasn't sure if I was awake or still dreaming.
I got up and the apartment was very still and quiet. My father had been out with Jennifer the night before and he wasn't up yet. He usually didn't get up till 9 or 10 anyway. I walked through the apartment and it was dark. The blinds were closed. I went to my desk and got the phone number and went to the kitchen phone. I dialed the numbers very slowly, pushing each one very carefully. I didn't want to make a mistake.
I held the receiver to my ear and listened to it ring. From the area code, I knew that I was calling a cell phone and didn't know what to expect. It rang 4 times when I heard the beep of a voicemail system. I didn't know what to say, where to begin, so I hung up.
I was at the cafe. I got there once on time. You know, I'm never on time, I'm always late. Usually Sonia's on her second cappuccino by the time I get there. Well, Sonia finally rushed in and she just talked for like 20 minutes straight. She was really upset and she looked tired. She handed me this piece of paper with a phone number scribbled on it. Then she started telling me about this dream she had that I don't know, she was doing something. And then she stopped in the middle of it and talked about how she just had lunch with Dad's girlfriend, Jennifer. You know, she was all mixed up. She just seemed to be describing miscellaneous details without saying anything important.
Then all at once she stopped talking and she turned to look out the window at my dad's apartment. It was a sunny day and there was a glare on the window so you couldn't see anything. And, I mean, for all we knew, he could have been watching us. You know. Then she turned back around and looked me in the eye for a full minute and said that
I'd better call him. But she wouldn't know what to say. I asked her if she meant it was Dad I should call, but she shook her head and she said, no, I just found out we have a brother.
I mean, it was Dimitri's idea. At first I wasn't sure about it, but he can be very persuasive when he wants to be.
The plan was to call and say that I was from my father's lawyer's office and that he wanted to arrange a meeting with his estranged son. That he wanted it to be very low-key and casual, so it would take place in a cafe, the one that Dimitri and I go to.
I also said that this was a sensitive issue with certain parties, and he should tell no one about it, and if he should call my father's residence or the law office, all knowledge of the secret meeting would be denied and the meeting itself would be canceled. Dimitri said that way we could get to the cafe early, and if for any reason we didn't want to go through with the meeting, we could chicken out without our half-brother really knowing anything.
I was also so curious just to see him. You know? I mean, he seems so mysterious. And if I could just get a look at him without him knowing.
No, you know, we really didn't know what to expect, so anything would have been a surprise. But I really didn't expect to like him. It was all so weird.
Well, Dimitri and I got to the cafe 45 minutes early. That's not true, actually. I got there 45 minutes early.
Dimitri showed up half an hour later. He looked awful. He was tired, unshaven.
At this cafe, you order at the counter. You give them your name, and they bring your order to the table. So we thought that we would just wait until they called Sam's name. That was the name that was written on the pad. Then we would know who he was.
Well, we waited and watched everybody who fit the description, or what we imagined him to look like. I actually imagined him to look like my dad. I guess he does a little bit.
We were there a long time, and we actually thought he wasn't going to show.
We decided to leave when this guy, who had been there the whole time, walked up, smiled, and asked if he could sit down. He'd been watching us.
He'd been watching you?
Yeah, he was watching us.
He wasn't at all what I had expected. He was polite.
Soft-spoken. Kind-looking. Beautiful. Not at all like my father on the outside.
Except for the eyes. Yes, he had my father's eyes.
Sonny and I were a bit nervous, but he put us at ease right away. He laughed and he said that he knew that there was something phony about the phone call. He'd already been meeting Dad pretty regularly, and my father had told him about us and that we were planning to get together when we made our prank phone call.
He said he knew it was Dmitri and I, but he didn't want to spoil our little plan. It was a bit awkward at first. I think Sam could tell.
He put us right at ease. He smiled, and we just kind of made small talk for a little bit. And then he got us talking about ourselves and telling funny stories about our father.
That's when I first noticed it.
It was very strange. We've been talking for about 45 minutes. You know, I was surprised at how well we were all getting along. We were all having a great time. I had just told a story about when Sonia and I were growing up, and we were all laughing together when I noticed Sam had this strange look on his face. He'd stopped laughing.
He had just taken a drink of coffee when Dmitri had told a joke, and we all started to laugh. And then Sam's eyes became fixed, and it looked like he was in pain, but he wasn't moving. All of his muscles were tensed.
His hands started to shake, but as if he couldn't move. He clenched his teeth, and coffee streamed out of his mouth and down his chin. Sonia screamed, and Sam lost his balance and fell over his chair.
I didn't know what to do. Everyone in the cafe stopped and turned to us. I had no idea what was happening. My head started to spin.
And Sam was lying on the floor. He had knocked the table over, and it had fallen on top of him.
He hit his head, and he was bleeding from a small cut. The waitress ran up and said, "Is he choking?" And I remember I was trying to open up his mouth, but it was clenched closed, and he was staring up at me the whole time,
I thought he was dying.
We didn't know what to do. There was milk and coffee all over the floor, and Sam was just shaking and making this horrible sound.
Foam started to come from his lips. Thank God for that woman.
She had been sitting at the next table a few feet away. What a stroke of luck. She rushed up to Sam as soon as he fell.
How did she help you?
I don't know. She took care of him. She picked his head up and told us that, he was having a seizure. We had no idea. We'd never seen a seizure before.
She said she was a nurse and told the waitress to call an ambulance. She said that Sam was having an epileptic seizure.
She had seen these before and tried to calm him down. She told us that he'd be all right, but he needed to get to the hospital right away.
It was only a few minutes before the paramedics got there. They took him out on a stretcher. Dmitri wanted to ride with them in the ambulance, but they told him that he couldn't. They told us that they were taking him to St. Luke's and that we could meet him there.
Dmitri said he'd go right away, but told me that I should go and tell my father what had happened, that he should know as soon as possible.
I was also struck by his looks. His handsome head of black hair was somehow a bit too black. His light eyes were perhaps too steady. His complexion too smooth and delicate, and his cheeks too rosy and healthy.
His eyes were large, blue, and piercing, and there was something gentle but heavy in their look. Something of that strange expression which makes people realize at the first glance that they are dealing with an epileptic.
His teeth were like pearls, and his lips like coral. It sounds like a strikingly beautiful face, but in reality it was repulsive rather than beautiful. His face reminded some people of a mask.
Fyodor called me right after he found out. He wanted me to meet him at the hospital. He was in quite a mood. Sonia had been waiting for him at the apartment. He got back around 2, and she told him the whole story. How she and Dmitri had found out about Sam and met him.
All thanks to me, of course. I mean, I never thought they'd come up with such a stunt. I didn't even know that Sonia was still seeing Dmitri. Anyway, Fyodor was furious with Sonia, me for blabbing to her, and especially with Dmitri.
One thing about Fyodor is he is a total control freak. And for all this to go on behind his back, to him it was unthinkable. I never seen him so angry. At the hospital, it was quite a scene. Sonia was in tears. I think he had hit her. By the time we got there, Sam had already been released, and Dmitri certainly wasn't going to stick around and wait for his dad to show up. There was still a lot of bad blood between them at that point.
I understand you're epileptic. Tell me about the seizure.
Well, most of all, I was embarrassed. I've been having epileptic seizures since I was 14. They never lasted very long and weren't very serious. And that day meeting my brother and sister for the first time,
well, it wasn't a great first impression. Well, I started feeling better in the ambulance. By the time we got to the hospital, I was fine. They wanted a doctor to look me over, and he treated the cut on my head. But I checked myself out within an hour.
But I had no idea that Sonia would tell Fyodor. It was kind of strange the way that happened. Apparently it was a real mess. I really liked Sonia and Dmitri. I kind of felt guilty. I mean, after all, if I'd just been up front with them, not gone along with their prank, and if I just played dumb.
After all, if I'd been up front and honest and not gone through with their prank phone call and played dumb, maybe everything would have worked out for the better.
But as it happened, it just made an awkward situation just worse.
I have to say, though, I do think Fyodor did overreact.
I mean, that night when we got back from the hospital, Fyodor was still livid. I mean, I'm not sure what the big deal was, but for some reason Fyodor didn't want Sam to meet Dmitri. At least not yet.
Then it came out that Sonia had been meeting with Dmitri regularly and even giving him money. Well, it didn't just come out. Fyodor was screaming at Sonia, cross-examining her like it was all her fault. I think now that he was just projecting all the frustration and anger he'd been feeling for Dmitri at her.
But she was crying. She never could stand up to him. Anyway, it got so bad that I finally said something. I told him to calm down and leave the poor girl alone.
After all, there was no real harm done. Sam was fine and everybody seemed to like each other. Well, then he turned on me.
He said, well, he said some very nasty things to me.
I was going to sit there and take it, so I left.
I felt sorry for Sonia.
Why was that?
I felt guilty. Or I partly guilty. I don't know why Fyodor treated her so harshly, but I just decided to just mind my own business. And after all, I just met these people. I didn't really know them at all. I just met Sonia, and I'd known Fyodor for a couple of weeks.
And there could have been other circumstances that I didn't know about.
The thing that seemed so strange was why Fyodor didn't want Sam and Dmitri to meet. I mean, sure, it's none of my business, we've established. But the more I thought about it, the weirder it seemed.
I mean, the whole thing was strange. Fyodor has this son that no one knows about. Suddenly he shows up, doesn't want money or anything, and Fyodor welcomes him with open arms.
Now, I know Fyodor. Even at his nicest, he wasn't that type of man. Then he freaks out because this other son meets his half-brother and sister, and they all like each other and get along.
I knew that Fyodor had gotten together with Sam once or twice, but he wouldn't say much about it, and he used to tell me everything. Well, at that point, I already felt that Fyodor and I were through, but I was still curious about the whole thing.
I decided to give Dmitri a call. I guess it was kind of tacky having dated his father. But I wanted to find out his take on all this.
I have to admit that I didn't trust Jennifer right off the bat. We'd only met once before at the dinner the night I came back from Europe, and then we'd only spoken briefly.
Well, I guess neither of us have made a very favorable impression. Sonia had said some things, so...
So when she called me out of the blue like that, I immediately thought that my dad had put her up to it, that he was using her to get to me, but...
But for what?
So my curiosity was piqued, so I decided to meet her for a drink.
And what happened?
You know, I couldn't have been more wrong about her.
She told me about how her and Dad had argued, what he had said to her.
She was pretty upset. See, Jennifer is a very different person from the way she appears. She puts up this front to protect herself.
Can you explain that?
Yeah.
Well, she's really a very sweet, very caring woman.
I think it's hard for beautiful women in our culture. You know, see, they're given so much extra attention because of their looks, and it's mostly the wrong kind of attention.
But anyway, I was very happy that she called me and that I got a chance to know her better.
I have a great amount of respect for Jennifer.
I have a great amount of respect for Jennifer.
I wasn't sure at first. I didn't really expect it at all. I mean, Fyodor, I think he was going through some pretty tough times. I mean, he hadn't seen Dmitri in a while, and things with Sonia were tense as well. And his relationship with Jennifer was starting to fall apart. It was just deteriorating before his eyes.
I think at that point, even though we were still strangers, I did accept his offer to move into Dmitri's room.
Fyodor's a very demonstrative man, except when it comes to his feelings, when he's kind of stoic.
And I felt bad for him. His family life was falling apart. I mean, funny thing is, you watch someone like Fyodor, he's a very successful man. But at this point in his personal life, it was a mess.
And I felt sorry and kind of responsible. I never wanted to come between him and the rest of his family. I don't think I did.
But he wanted to get close to someone. You could tell he was lonely. So when he told me that Dmitri's old room was empty and that he had no reason to expect him to come back anytime soon, so for my part, he was my father. I wanted to get to know him.
I hadn't spoken with Fyodor since our divorce. It wasn't very amicable. I saw Dmitri and Sonia only occasionally. I guess we were never very close, and I do regret that. But Sonia and I would speak on the phone quite a bit, every few weeks or so. It was difficult, them being in New York, me being in LA or Europe. Dmitri had phoned me while he was in Paris, but we missed each other by a few days. Well, Sonia told me about the whole thing. It was news to me. I had never known about another son, but I wasn't surprised, not for a minute. Fyodor never was very good at being faithful. Well, at that point, Dmitri had moved out and this new kid had moved in. Just like that. And Dmitri, in his usual despotic fashion, had cut them both off financially, Dmitri and Sonia. In a certain respect, I think it was for Dmitri's own good. Everyone knew he was using, and this would be a chance for him to stand on his own 2 feet for once. Fyodor had spoiled him for too long, the typical only son thing. But Sonia, she was always a bit lost in this world. Fyodor had always kept her very dependent on him. And when that support was suddenly taken away, well, what did he think would happen?
What was the living situation like?
I think it was pretty good.
For the first month, everything was great. I mean, we were all a bit nervous, you know, getting to know each other. But to be honest, it was fun.
As far as living with a father you've never met and a family you've never known, I think it was fairly successful.
My first impression of Sonia was right on. I mean, she's pretty shy and introverted, but once you get to coax her out of her shell, she's quite a wonderful person.
And I say that despite everything that's happened.
Fyodor's basically, you know, he's the same way. Not to say he's shy, God no. But once you get past his overblown facade, he's a really great guy.
And the stealing incident?
I had started noticing at night that the door was left open. And at first I just thought it was Sonia's forgetfulness. I'm obsessive compulsive, so I often check doors 2 or 3 times before I leave an apartment.
I didn't let Fyodor know right away. He's a bit paranoid of security.
And I also didn't think it was, you know, much of a big deal. I just kind of thought that Sonia had forgotten to lock the door. And like I said, who was I to say anything? But I was just a guess at that point.
Are we supposed to believe that Sonia, that meek little girl, would actually steal from her own father's house and give the money to Dmitri? No way. Sonia was terrified of Fyodor, but she was also dedicated, loyal, and respectful too. She'd never steal from anyone, let alone him. And if she did, she'd certainly be clever enough not to get caught.
You know, I realized that Sonia loves Dmitri, and I mean, he's her brother and all, but I just don't understand why. I mean, the guy just walks all over her, treats her like garbage.
But whatever. The point is, if she needed money, I would have gladly given it to her, and I think that she was afraid to ask Fyodor for money, and rightly so, because...
He's not stupid. He knew every cent would go up Dmitri's nose, but to steal like that...
All right, take that section over.
Yeah.
And come on. This new kid moves in and all of a sudden this problem starts. I'm not pointing fingers, but...
You went to your father?
I did. I guess my sense of self-preservation kicked in.
Money starts to disappear. Obviously, Fyodor would suspect me first, so I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to tell him.
So I went to him and told him what I knew. Sonia was stealing and probably giving the money to Dmitri.
You know, I wouldn't doubt it if Fyodor took the money himself, just to raise suspicion and turn the kids against each other. I have no idea why he would, but that's the type of man that Fyodor was. A maniacal, conniving, vindictive man. He was a real bastard, and he knew it. I know it's not a very nice thing to say, but I'm glad he's dead. The world is a better place for it.
So, what ultimately happened was that Fyodor confronted Sonia about the money situation, and before I knew it, Sonia was on her way out.
Now, I don't know if Fyodor threw her out or if that was her decision on her own, but in any case, she was leaving.
I guess she had confessed, so I tried to convince her to stay, but she made it abundantly clear that she wanted to get the heck out of there, and I wasn't going to argue with her, even though I wanted her to. Well, I can understand her point of view.
Well, I called up a friend of mine who owed me a favor, and she said Sonia could stay with her for a while.
Alyosha had been struck by Katerina's beauty, when 3 weeks before Dmitri had first brought him at Katerina's request to be introduced to her.
Alyosha had been silent, but he had seen a great deal very clearly. He was struck by Katerina's proud ease, self-confidence, and haughtiness.
He thought her great glowing black eyes were very fine, especially with her pale, even rather sallow, longish face. But in those eyes and in the lines of her lips there was something in which his brother might well be passionately in love.
But which perhaps could not be loved for long.
Well, Sam and I had been friends for a long time. We met in college. And anyway, we hardly get to see each other, anymore, like maybe once or twice a year, something like that. But despite that, we just always tried to keep in contact with one another.
Well, he called out of the blue one day and asked if I could put up a friend of his. It actually worked out because my roommate had just moved out a couple of weeks ago and I was looking for someone to share the rent. It's tough in the city. I was going to put an ad in the paper, but you never know what you'll get.
So Sonia and I, we met for coffee, and then actually, she moved in and we became very good friends.
Things were happening pretty fast. The situation was not good between Fyodor and I. He was spending more and more time with Sam.
Our last argument was over his kicking Sonia out of the house.
She's a mixed-up kid, but very sweet. I don't know how anyone could treat his family like that.
What about the stolen money?
Well, I'd only just heard about that. Dmitri told me that you asked him about it. That's the first I've heard of it. It was only a couple of $100.
250.
Whatever. I'm sure Sonia didn't take it. That's impossible. And if she did, she certainly never gave any of it to Dmitri.
How do you know that?
Well, Dmitri and I began to see a lot of each other.
Listen, I didn't plan it. It just happened, okay? That's another reason why I couldn't stay with Fyodor.
Well, if Sonia had been giving him money, I would have known. He would have told me. Anyway, after Sam moved in, Dmitri hardly ever saw her.
Then Sonia told me that Fyodor's girlfriend had broken up with him and had taken up with Dmitri. Try to figure that one out. It didn't take very long for them to move in together. It's kind of suspicious, sort of like a soap opera. What could Dmitri have in common with a woman like that? Well, quite a bit actually, if you think about it. I mean, I've never actually met her, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see what's going on.
Sonia and I got along really well. She was, we became friends. She's a really sweet girl, and she's a really good listener, because I can be a chatterbox sometimes, as you can probably tell. But yeah, it was really nice. Sam would come over, and I'd make dinner, and they had this really nice relationship.
He was like a big brother for her, actually. He was very, very protective of her. I think in a way he felt responsible for the fact that Sonia lost, she lost the touch with her father.
Her real brother is kind of mixed up. Although I have to say I only met him once. He came by to see Sonia about money, I think. Anyway, I only met him briefly, and he seemed nice enough. I'd heard some stories about him, but I guess I'd already had my mind made up.
It was an incredibly awkward situation. I mean, Jennifer and I totally fell for each other, like right away. For my part, I didn't think that could happen to me anymore. I'd been in my share of bad relationships and had gotten pretty cynical, and I thought she felt the same.
It was also a lot tougher for her, given the situation with my dad at the time. I had wanted to be the one to break it to my father, to save Jennifer from that unpleasant experience, but, she insisted.
One thing about Jen, she's a very loving, very sweet woman, but also very headstrong and very stubborn. I tried to talk to her into having both of us go and meet him at the same time, to tell him. She wouldn't hear of that.
Fine. I realized it's something she needed to do on her own, so I let her have her way.
as far as Sonia's feelings for Sam, as I said, she's really shy, and but I think that something was going on. I mean, like, she's never said anything about it, but I think she has some sort of feelings for him. And I tried to call her on it once. I asked her what she thought of Sam, and she turned bright red.
And she just said that I was crazy.
Now, no one told me until later that she was his half-sister. I mean, how could I have known? But that doesn't change anything as far as I'm concerned. I still think she felt something for him. I'm sure she'd never act on it. She's such an introvert.
Katerina. Yeah. I like her a lot. I still do. She, we had a brief relationship. I guess it was her real first boyfriend. But, you know, this didn't work out. And about a year or so later, we became close friends.
It was nice because kind of the sexual tension that existed between us was kind of in the past.
But I could kind of tell she still liked me, but I tried not to lead on to that. I didn't pay much attention to it. But her and Sonia became good friends.
You know, Jen finally arranged to meet with my dad to tell him about us. You know, she was nervous. Hell, I was nervous. I didn't know how he would react. I mean, I knew he wasn't going to be happy about it. And he wasn't. Jennifer and I went to that cafe by my dad's apartment. I tried to talk her into letting me go with her, but she refused. I had coffee and waited for her as she went to tell him.
I could actually see them through the window.
I saw the whole thing. It's weird. They were both very emotional. And honestly, I was terrified that he'd do something to her.
But it turned into a big shouting match and she stormed out. I was really relieved when she came back to the cafe, but she was shaking.
I guess that's the night it happened.
She told me what happened. It took her 20 minutes to calm down. And all the while, I could see my father pacing back and forth in his apartment. He was talking on the phone and gesturing and yelling.
Jen she just sat with her back to the window. She didn't want to see him ever again, under no circumstances. She was sipping a cup of tea, but her hands were trembling. She nearly spilled it each time she raised it to her lips. I've never seen her like that. She was a frightened little girl.
Yeah, it was that Thursday night. Sonia and I had planned to have Sam over. Nothing special. We all got together every once in a while. We'd order takeout or rent a movie, you know, just something casual. I think it was Sam's way of checking in on Sonia, you know, making sure she was doing okay.
I even think that it was her father's way of checking up on her, you know, without being too obvious about it.
That her father was concerned about her.
Yeah.
You knew Sam for a long time. Did he ever mention that he was an epileptic?
Yeah. Yeah, I knew. I think he was really embarrassed about it, but, you know, I heard that he'd had other seizures before.
Tell me about that night.
As I said, we ordered some Chinese food and we were sitting around watching a movie, and suddenly Sam started shaking and making a funny noise. First I thought he was just fooling around, and then I thought he was choking.
And when Sonia actually had gone to the bathroom,
she heard this noise and she came running out, and then at that point we realized what was happening, so we called the ambulance.
Well, as I said, my seizures are generally pretty mild, and within a couple of hours I start to feel better.
But this one, I've only had a few of these in my lifetime. This is where it takes me more than a few hours to fully recover. I mean, I was kind of expecting to have a seizure. I mean, you can't really predict when they're going to come. They're kind of cyclical. At least mine are.
I know it's strange to say, and I don't think that many epileptics will be able to say this, but I felt one coming.
And I did. It took me a full day to recover. And that's when they told me about Fyodor. mean, I wish I could have been there.
It probably wouldn't have happened.
It might never have happened.
I don't normally work at the desk, just one night a week. But the concierge called me in that night. One of the guys was sick, so I came in to stand in for him. I'd seen Mr. Karamazov around the apartment building, but I'd never spoken to him. I think his children lived with him. It was quiet that night. People came and went. Nothing unusual happened. Like I said, I've met Mr. Karamazov, but I never met his children, so I wouldn't have recognized them. The usual doorman would know them, not me.
What happened the next day?
Well, I was being checked out of the hospital, and Sonia and Katerina came to see me. Well, I thought they were coming to see me, but they actually... When I first saw Sonia come in, I could tell that something was wrong.
The look that Sonia had on her face was not a good one. It's kind of...
Surprise, kind of like between surprise and... I don't know what. She wasn't crying or anything, but I could tell something was wrong, and then when Dmitri followed her in.
I knew something was wrong.
I started work at 8:30. On Fridays I vacuum the hallways. Only the even-numbered ones though. It must have been about 10 o'clock by the time I got to the 8th floor. At first I walked by Mr. Karamazov's apartment and thought it was strange that it was open. But I didn't think much of it at the time. So I began vacuuming from the other end of the hall. That's where the plug is. And worked my way back to the elevator. As I was vacuuming, I was looking inside Mr. Karamazov's, and I expected somebody to close the door because the vacuum is so loud, but nobody came. And that's when I saw it. Right inside the apartment by the door, a small smudge of blood. So I called the super from downstairs and we walked in together.
Why did you wait for him? Why didn't you just go inside?
I don't know. I was frightened. I've worked in that building for not even a year. It's a nice building with nice tenants. I didn't want to get involved. I mean, I just thought it would be better if the super was there.
What did you find inside?
Mr. Karamazov. He was lying in the bathtub. His head was all bashed in with a lamp, I think. The blood was all dried, like black.
Why do you think it was smashed in by a lamp?
Because it was there.
On the floor?
Yeah.
I've been Mr. Karamazov's attorney for the last 12 years. While I'm not officially his estate lawyer, Mr. Karamazov did on several occasions ask my opinion about his will. Several circumstances within the last few months had prompted Mr. Karamazov to reconsider the distribution of his estate. But to the best of my knowledge, he had not officially altered his will, though in fact he was planning to do so. Mr. Karamazov is survived by 3 children, one of which had been illegitimate, but had by blood tests been proven to be Mr. Karamazov's son. There is also Mr. Karamazov's ex-wife and several other parties that were very close to him. Considering the size of his estate, close to $26 million, the exact distribution of his assets to his heirs remains a touchy subject. That's why I recommend that you speak with Mr. Karamazov's estate lawyer directly.
Have you been in touch with any of his children?
I am not a specialist in criminal law, nor do I wish to violate client confidentiality, but I have been contacted by parties directly involved with Mr. Karamazov.
What do you know about the murder?
Nothing. I told you, I was in the hospital, passed out.
You weren't at the apartment that night?
No, I was in the hospital. Ask the EMTs.
Your father's lawyer claims that he was planning to change his will. Did he ever talk to you about it?
Yeah, he did. Said he regretted the fact that we only just recently met. He wanted to make up for it. So he wanted to, essentially treat me like his other children.
Did he tell that to anyone else?
I don't know.
What else?
Well, he told me that he was disappointed with Dmitri and Jennifer.
He loved them both, and things weren't working out.
So he was going to cut them out of any inheritance?
He told me that he didn't want that bitch to get any more of his money. And he also told me that any money that he gave Dmitri was going to go up his nose, so Dmitri wasn't going to get any of the inheritance until he fixed his drug problem.
They both admit to seeing your father the night of his death.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
That makes sense.
So you think they may have had something to do with it?
I don't know. I guess it's possible. Fyodor was worth a great deal of money, as we know.
So you think it's possible that Dmitri and Jennifer, knowing that your father was planning to write them out of his will, conspired together to murder him before he got the chance to change his will?
Is it possible? Anything's possible. Why don't you ask them?
We did ask them.
What did they say?
You know, right from the start I knew something was going on between Sonia and him.
Who?
Who do you think? Sam.
What do you mean?
Well, okay. The whole stealing incident, for instance, Sonia never took a thing from my father. And that whole thing about how she was stealing money to give it to me to buy drugs is absurd. It's just a way of slandering me. You know, I haven't touched anything for months. Anyway, Sam was stealing money from the start. Sonia took the rap to cover for him. There was definitely something going on between Sonia and Sam, and I think she felt like she needed to cover it up. Either that or Sam threatened to tell my dad about him. And so, unless she took the blame, you know, for him stealing.
And the murder?
I have no doubt it was Sam. I mean, it's all too convenient. Sam shows up and suddenly my sister and I are out on the street. You know, my dad won't return my phone calls. I mean, Sam was trying to get money out of my dad. He had keys, you know? And the whole seizure thing? I mean, I can fall down on the floor right now and start shaking, but it doesn't prove that I'm an epileptic. Oh. You know, and I bet that first seizure at the cafe was a fake too.
So you believe that Sam was either involved with Sonia or blackmailing her, killed your father because he wouldn't give him the money, and faked a seizure to serve as an alibi?
Sure. Sure, I mean, the blood test proved that Sam was related. And he was trying to get money out of my father. If he couldn't do it while my father was alive, he'd do it while he was dead. That's what lawyers are for.
But you admit to seeing your father that night.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw him through the window from the cafe. And he was still very much alive when we left.
I wasn't even aware Fyodor put me in his will to begin with. We never talked about it. This is the first I've heard. Although I'm not surprised he was going to change it. That is very much like him.
You were at his place the night of the murder.
Yeah, I was. He'd been calling me, leaving insulting messages, calling 20 times a day, harassing me. I wanted him to stop. I thought it was time I confronted him about it.
You didn't save any of these insulting messages?
No, I erased them.
What was he harassing you about?
He was harassing me because he was an angry, bitter man, and because I'd ended our relationship.
Any other reason?
Because I went out with his son Dmitri a couple of times. That doesn't make me a bad person, so what?
So you were the last person to see Mr. Karamazov alive?
Of course not. The last person to see him alive was the person who killed him, not me.
Of course, excuse me. Who do you think that was?
Who's the cop here?
I'm just interested in your opinion, that's all.
Well, I think it stayed in the family.
Explain that.
I've come to find out that Fyodor was close to his daughter. Very close. Too close, if you can understand me.
Are you talking about incest?
Something like that.
That's a pretty serious accusation. How did you come to it?
Fyodor was always strange with his kids. I suspected it myself.
So he told you?
Of course he didn't. I asked Dmitri about it. Apparently he'd been molesting her for years. She finally had enough and left. That's why Fyodor made up that story about her stealing. He didn't kick her out. She finally had some place to go, so she left. Nobody ever stole anything from Fyodor. It was a smoke screen.
Well, you never said anything to us about this.
Why should she?
So you think Sonia killed her father?
Or arranged for it? He certainly deserved it as far as I'm concerned. And whoever did it deserves a medal for public service.
You are certainly very outspoken.
Why shouldn't I be? I have nothing to hide. Listen. After I left Fyodor's apartment that night, Dmitri and I watched from the cafe for a while. He was talking to someone on the phone who got him angry, or so it looked. If I were you, I'd be interested in that phone conversation. Maybe somebody wanted to make sure that he was going to be home that night.
The billing shows that you made a call to Fyodor Karamazov's apartment the night he was murdered.
No, I did not. I never even met him. Why would I call him?
Is this the number of your cell phone?
Yes.
The phone company's records confirm it.
But why would I call him? I don't even know the guy. I didn't call him.
Then how do you explain this?
I don't know. Maybe Sonia used my phone to call him.
Did she ever ask you whether she could use it?
No.
Did you ever notice your phone missing?
No, I always keep it in my purse.
So Sonia must have gone into your purse, used your phone without your permission, and put it back all without you knowing about it?
I don't know. But it wasn't me.
Could it have been Sam?
I don't know who it was. It just wasn't me.
You said that Sonia had gone into the bathroom that night before Sam had his seizure?
Yes.
Do you know where your cell phone was at that time?
I don't remember.
was your relationship with your father?
Fine. What do you mean by that?
Did he ever mistreat you in any way?
No, of course not.
Never?
No, my father has a temper, but he never mistreated me.
And he never molested you physically or in any other way?
What are you talking about?
Jennifer suggested that your father had sexually molested you.
It's crazy. And completely untrue.
Did you ever steal from your father?
Yes. Once. I'm ashamed of it, but once I took $250 from his wallet. Everybody knows about it.
What did you do with the money?
I gave it to my brother Dmitri.
What for?
He needed the money, and my father had stopped giving me an allowance, so I didn't have any of my own to give to him.
What did Dmitri need the money?
I didn't ask.
It was none of my business.
Your roommate Katerina has a cell phone. Did you ever use it?
No, I have one of my own.
You never used her phone, not even once?
Of course not. Why would I? I have one of my own.
Why do you think Jennifer would make up that story about your father molesting you?
I don't know. You'd have to ask her. I can only guess she did it to get even. I like Jen, but she reacted very badly when my dad broke up with her.
How so?
Well, by seducing Dmitri, for starters.
And she did this to get even?
I think partly. Partly to stay involved in my father's life. If she couldn't have him, she'd take the next best thing.
Why?
I hate to say it, but I think she was after my dad's money. It's no secret he was doing well.
So you think this is why your dad ended the relationship?
I'm not sure. It's none of my business. I do know she was angry when she found out my dad was going to change his will.
How'd you know that?
Dmitri told me.
Dmitri told me.
So your father told Jennifer that he was changing his will?
No, I don't think he did. I think she called his lawyer and asked him. It was when we first met Sam. Jennifer wanted to know if Dad was going to include him in the will.
Why would she care about that?
Again, I don't know. She was always concerned with other people's affairs. I guess she thought it would somehow affect her.
Tell me about your aunt.
No, you should really be asking Sonia about this. She goes and visits her. I haven't seen her since I was a kid. I never knew much about her. I don't think she and Dad were ever very close. She lived in Detroit, and that's where my dad's family grew up. She taught grammar school for a while, and then she became a nun. She became a nun, and then she taught grammar school. And then she developed some sort of mental illness. I probably only saw her about a half dozen times. My one memory that I do remember was we were at this family picnic in this park, and Sonny and I were little. I could have been more than 10 or 11, and we were there was the grown-ups table, and then there was the kids table where we were, and it was Sonia, me, and a bunch of other kids, and Aunt Vivara, that's her name. Aunt Vivara was watching us, and she was sitting there in her black nun's habit, on this, and I remember it being this beautifully hot July day, and she's sitting there, and I remember being mortified, completely embarrassed that she was going to do something, say something weird that the other kids would use, and later on back at school. Well, after we finished our hot dogs and potato salad or whatever we had, in absolute silence, Aunt Varvara said, take your plastic fork and your plastic knife and arrange them in a cross in the center of our plates to remind ourselves of the great suffering that Jesus went through on the cross and to absolve ourselves of our sins. Well, the other kids didn't really seem particularly bothered by this, and I wasn't too embarrassed. I just remember thinking how odd it was, a bunch of kids sitting there on this beautiful July day, arranging plastic silverware in the sign of a cross on the center of our paper plates. Anyway, she got sick. Dad brought her to a hospital in Connecticut. Not sure why. I don't think he ever went to visit her. I guess he just wanted to have her close in case the mood struck him or something. Or maybe he felt guilty.
Are you a man of strong religious belief?
No. I think it's all a crock of shit.
So what happened when you went to meet your aunt?
That crazy old nun? That was Sonia's idea. It kind of freaked me out, actually. I wasn't raised to be religious. I don't really think I understand the people that are raised to be religious. Anyway, Sonia told me she had this aunt that had been institutionalized and that she goes to see her every month or so. So she asked me to go with her, which I didn't really want to do, but I could tell it was important to her. So I agreed to do it. We took the train up to Connecticut and took a bus over to the hospital. Wow, what a place. You should have seen it. There's waterfalls, plastic flowers everywhere, beach chairs out on the lawn. Oh, I wouldn't mind living there, actually. I mean, I don't really know if my father ever really went to go visit his sister, but I do know that he took good care of her. Pretty swank. Anyway, so we got there and went to go see her aunt. And I guess she had her good and bad days, so Sonia went to go talk to her just to kind of see what kind of mood she was in. So I just kind of held back and waited in the reception area, and I could see there was these glass doors that separated where I was as to where Sonia and her aunt was, and they were sitting on the bench on this window. It was pretty sunny out, and the sun was on them. And it was quite remarkable. I mean, here's two women that are 30 years age difference, and there they are talking like they're the best of friends. I remember commenting to myself how nice it was. But anyway, they were chit-chatting, and then at one point, they both turned around and looked at me. Yeah, they both turned around and they looked at me, and I remember feeling very uncomfortable about that, but they smiled. And then Sonia got up and walked over to me, and she said that she didn't really tell her aunt who I was, just that I was a friend and that her aunt was interested in meeting me. So we walked over to her. And I can remember it was like we were walking in slow motion. It was only like 15 yards away from where I was, maybe 20 yards, but it felt like an eternity walking towards her aunt. And the whole time that we were walking towards her, I could feel her aunt's eyes just on top of me. It was kind of crushing, the weight. And at that point, I suddenly felt that I was holding Sonia's hand, and that too made me feel very uncomfortable.
Matthew 27.
But as we approached her,
when Judas, who had betrayed
she introduced me as her friend and sat down next to her aunt, and her aunt made the sign of cross, the sign of the cross. That kind of freaked me out. And Sonia could see that I was uncomfortable about it, so she started to make some small talk. And the whole time, her aunt had this look on her face, kind of this plastic smile, and at times just not a peep, not a sound. Just sat there looking at her. But I gave her aunt a chocolate bar that I got from the vending machine where I was waiting. And Sonia thought that would be a nice gesture. I think I cracked a smile from her aunt. But
Matthew 27.
anyway, as we started to run out of small talk, we started to leave, and on our way out, our aunt had stopped us, and she kissed me on the forehead. What do you do to that? I just wanted to get the heck out of there. It just gave me this creepy feeling, this up my back. And so I bolted for the door, and I don't even remember what happened next. You know, before I knew it, we were in the car, and Sonia was giving me this feeble explanation for her aunt, and which, you know, whatever, it's fine with me. Just she didn't have to make up any excuses for the actions of a mad woman.
And hanged himself.
How's your relationship with your half-brother, Sam?
I like him. But I know it sounds crazy. I don't think he's my half-brother.
Why not?
I don't know. I just don't think that he is. I mean, there's no real proof, is there? My father's lawyer told me there was a blood test, but I've never seen it. To me, it's all hearsay.
Then who is he?
I don't know. I had this crazy idea last night that Jennifer and Sam cooked the whole thing up with my dad's lawyer just to get the money from my father. I never trusted his lawyer. I know that Jen has been in touch with him since my father's death.
How do you know that?
Dimitri told me.
So you think Jennifer got together with your father's lawyer and came up with the idea of telling your dad that he had an illegitimate son. They introduced Sam to your father with the intention of cutting him in on any future inheritance. Jennifer, Sam, and the attorney would split it 3 ways.
It's probably all just a fantasy of mine, but people have done crazier things for money, and certainly, since Sam came on the scene, there's been a marked change in my father's relationship with Dimitri and me.
But there's also been a change in your father's relationship with Jennifer.
That could be Sam's doing. I mean, maybe he got greedy and realized he didn't need Jen to get into my father's good graces. A 50% share is better than a third. But of course, I have no proof. It's all just a silly idea of mine.
The day after your father's death, you picked Sam up from the hospital.
Yeah.
In his room.
No, we met in the lobby.
Why the lobby?
I don't know. I suppose he'd already been discharged.
The hospital has no record of you staying overnight.
Well, that's because I gave them a false name.
A false name?
Look, I don't have health insurance. If you give them a phony name, you don't have to pay for it.
What was the name that you gave them?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
That's right. I was having an epileptic seizure. Okay, I was in a panic. I don't remember.
But your mind was clear enough not to use your own name.
That's right.
The point is there is no record, no proof that you actually went to the hospital that night. The night Mr. Karamazov was murdered.
Well, I was. Ask the EMTs.
There's no doubt that you were taken to the hospital. Just no proof that you spent the night there. Or for that matter, that your seizure was genuine.
Sonia and Dimitri picked me up the next day.
They met you in the lobby. You could have just met them there yourself.
Prove it.
The night of your seizure, you were with Sonia and Katerina.
Yes. They'll tell you that my seizure was real.
Did you talk to Fyodor that night?
No.
You didn't call him? Not on Katerina's cell phone? Or have her call him for you?
No, why would I?
To make sure he was home.
So that I could sneak out, okay? Sneak out of the hospital, go see him, murder him, then sneak back to the hospital for Sonia and Dimitri to pick me up the next day? Why are you harassing me? I mean, I can only suspect that... I can only guess that you think I'm your That I'm your suspect.
In fact, you're not. We've taken a suspect into custody. We're questioning everyone, checking everyone's story to make sure. But so far, everyone seems to be contradicting each other.
You've arrested someone? Who?
We're holding him on a related charge, but the evidence points to Gregory, the man who worked in the building, the man who found your father's body.
Gregory the janitor. Really? What evidence do you have against him?
Bank records show that your father withdrew $5,000 3 days before he was murdered. Gregory had deposited that exact amount 2 days after the murder into his own bank account.
That's just circumstantial. Could be a complete coincidence.
$5,000 is a lot of money to somebody like Gregory. That's his salary for 3 months. He also had a previous felony conviction.
Let me tell you something. I've never met this man, and I've probably seen him around in the building without really knowing who he is, but I can assure you that he didn't do it.
Your father's body was found in the bathtub. The skull had been fractured in 3 places. In the hallway leading to the bathroom, we found an empty bank envelope. There was a smudge of blood on it. Gregory murdered your father Thursday night, probably just to rob him. Then he went to work the next day as if nothing had happened. It may sound unusual, but it's not. They think by not running that no one will suspect them.
You know, your theory is just all well and good. But let me assure you, he didn't do it.
Why are you so sure it wasn't him?
Because it's too simple. It's too easy. Listen, I know that I'm not very old, but I've led a very difficult life thus far. You know, sometimes the world isn't such a great place after all. You know that? And they don't teach children about it. What they do is they teach children, they fill the heads of children with these ideas and notions that, I mean, it's unbelievable that we even survive from generation to generation at all.
What do you mean?
We teach children that they should love each other, and that we're all brothers and sisters. We teach children that we should try and live by the golden rule, that we should treat others the way that we want ourselves to be treated. We teach them to turn the other cheek, and that 2 wrongs don't make a right, and that might doesn't make right. We teach them forgiveness and gratitude and gentleness. That happiness is the most important thing, and that greed and lust are vices, and that we are accountable for our actions, and that the world repays us for virtue and honesty, and that good is repaid with good and evil is repaid with evil. Let me tell you something. I've struggled with this my whole life. I have banged my head against innumerable walls trying to find out the truth that is self-evident, that all these beautiful ideas and poetic notions of life, they're all lies. They're all a bunch of lies. Lies that we tell ourselves so that we could sleep at night. Lies that we tell ourselves so that we can forget that we're actually just a bunch of animals. And that the world doesn't repay you for honesty and virtue. And that everything is accepted in the world unless you get caught. And the only thing that matters is the need for survival. And if your survival depends on the demolition and exploitation and destruction of others, then so be it. I mean, that's what we should be teaching children right from the beginning. Teach them about this anarchy.
I had no idea you were such a philosopher. And how does all of this pertain to the janitor's innocence or guilt?
Listen, a crime was committed, and it's your job to arrest someone. So you arrest someone, the most obvious suspect. I mean, it's your job also to persuade society of this myth of justice and retribution, but you're not interested in that. You're interested in finger pointing and scapegoats. The only crime that Gregory the janitor committed was that he was catchable. Yeah, you're like the fisherman that lets the big fish get away and keeps the small fish.
And you then? Are you perhaps a big fish?
It's your job to find out. But since you've got your man, I mean, I guess you're satisfied. Maybe you're right. Maybe Gregory did murder my father. It was just a robbery, plain and simple.
It does appear so. At the present, unless we find it reasonable to suspect someone else.
Don't be cute. I mean, you have reason to suspect all of us. I mean, we all had plenty to gain from my father's death. No one more than I suppose. But, you know, you're happy with your janitor. I mean, it's all clean and tidy. I guess you'll just move on now, on to the next case.
Where are you staying now?
Well, since you've sealed off Fyodor's apartment, you know, I've been sleeping at Katerina and Sonia's.
Really?
On the couch.
It's not my concern.
You wanted to know. I told you.
We're done with the apartment. You can move back in tomorrow.
It doesn't really matter. I'm comfortable where I am. On the couch.
Something wrong with the apartment? You're not superstitious.
No. Look at me. Do I look superstitious to you? I mean, the fact of the matter is, you know, I live there to be closer to my father and to get to know him. And now that he's dead, there's really no reason for me to be there.
Tell me what happened.
We had arranged to go to a movie, Sam, Katerina, and I. In fact, it was his idea in the first place.
Sonia and I, we bought some tickets to go to the theater, and we were standing out there at about 2:45, you know, waiting for Sam.
At 3 o'clock, I went inside the theater. Katerina said she'd wait for Sam outside. We'd already bought him a ticket.
And then at about 20 after 3, I just decided to go in. So I gave the woman at the booth, you know, his ticket, and I gave a description of him because I just figured, okay, he's just running late.
After the movie was over, Katerina and I decided to get something to eat. We went to a diner. I brought back a cheeseburger for Sam. Actually, Katerina said not to. After all, he'd stood us up at the movies.
But it was almost 8 by the time we got back to the apartment, and there was a note taped to the door.
It was Sam's writing. It said that we should call 911 and that we shouldn't enter the bathroom.
And we were both really frightened. So I told Sonia to call the police, and because the lock on the bathroom door, you could open it from the outside. All you just need to do is just stick a pin into the little hole in the doorknob. And
I had just dialed 911 when I heard Katerina. She didn't scream. She just started to cry.
Sam was in the tub. The water, it was dark red, and I think I must have stared at him for like a few minutes before I looked over and I saw the half bottle of vodka next to him, and his eyes were still open.
Finally, she let me by. And she looked at me and she pulled the door shut. And she said that I couldn't go in. Because Sam had committed suicide. The person on the phone was asking me what our address was. I couldn't. even remember it.
I heard that you'd caught some janitor, some man. You have someone in custody?
We've had him in custody for the last week. We know that he robbed the apartment, but he said that Mr. Karamazov was already dead by then. He kept denying knowing anything about the murder itself. We told him that we had enough evidence to convict him for the murder anyway, and that it would be better for him if he admitted it. His lawyer finally convinced him. He signed a formal confession late this morning.
Despite this, we always try to think about each
About 15 minutes, I waited outside.
But it just turned
I was going to pay.